Hey guys, welcome back to Real Housewives Recaps. Today, we're on Dirty John Part 3. I've been so excited to talk about this one. A huge shout out to my good friend, my producer, Amanda, who chose this show. I have really enjoyed going through these and recapping them. I have fallen back into hours of research and deep diving this case. It's so fascinating to me. Just in case this is episode 3, go back and listen to episode 1 and 2 if you want. In case this is your first and only one, what I do is I talk about what happened in real life, what happened on the Netflix show. It is still up on Netflix if you want to watch along with me. And I just talk about it all. And I say this every time, but I gotta give credit to Netflix. They follow the story very, very closely. The same guy that did the interview on the podcast helped produce this show, and they stuck pretty accurate. They really didn't add in too many frivolous details. So it's fascinating. It's an interesting case. I gotta say the actors in this are marvelous, and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm excited to talk about this one because this episode's a little bit different than the other ones. So we're gonna talk about it all. But first, a big thank you to Amanda. Thank you for picking this. Hey, if you want to have your pick heard or watched or reviewed or whatever, check out Patreon. That's where it's going on. My top tier gets to pick what we recap. And so this is Amanda's pick. Let's get into it. So episode 3 on Netflix is called Remember It Was Me. Episode 3 of the podcast, which actually goes through and talks to the real people involved in the story, is called Filthy. So the podcast takes more of a historical approach, which the Netflix episode does too, but the podcast almost exclusively talks to Tanya and Deborah. I mix their names up, but Tanya, the ex-wife. I am fascinated with her story, and you guys, I just found out she has a podcast. Apparently, she has a podcast over on Audible. I don't have an Audible subscription, but I am considering getting one to talk about that and to listen to what she has to say, because apparently it was just complete and total chaos and torture. And I'm fascinated, and if that's something you guys want me to talk about, you need to let me know in the comments so I know whether or not that's something we want to dive into. But first, okay, so again, mostly they follow each other, the real life events and what's happening on this episode. We get to see, the episode starts out with meeting Tanya. She's at some dive bar with her friends. It's in Dayton, Ohio, and she didn't really want to be there. She was there, after work. She was in scrubs. He took notice of her. They strike up a conversation. She ends up walking over. He's being all charming and flirty. They end up sitting together at the bar, and we find out she's a nurse. I never say that word right. Anesthetist. Good Lord. So she's explaining what the job entails to him. He's immediately intrigued by this, and she's explaining what the difference is between being the nurse versus the anesthesiologist, and just, everything that comes along with it. So he explains that he is in law school, and he's on the pathway to being material rich, but spiritually poor. Meanwhile, in this episode, we're cutting back and forth. The timeline is kind of all over the place in this one. We're showing clips like this of his wedding, where his best man is up speaking. All his groomsmen are there. Weird stuff going on where they keep dropping hints that, we've only known him a couple years, but he's crazy. They kind of reveal that his nickname is Dirty. And in the podcast, it takes it a step further, and they start calling him Filthy. She hears this for the very first time, the ex-wife, Tanya, at the wedding, and asks him, again, this is the real life version, she asks him, what the heck does that mean? And he kind of gives her a vague answer, and she doesn't really circle back on that. I mean, wow. Okay, so back in, present day, we see Deborah going through his paperwork. We saw this at the end of the last episode. She snuck in. She used her own camera system to make sure she wasn't on camera, because he watches those cameras. She goes through his paper, takes a million pictures of all the terrible things people are saying about him, all the ways he's gotten in trouble, all the felonies, all the disgusting, horrible things he's done. She, again, timeline all over the place. They keep cutting in with her having conversations with him and having to pretend like everything's fine, no problem. Didn't go through all your paperwork because she knows he'll lose his mind. So it's interesting to see. Now, let me just tell you, this episode is infuriating. Deborah makes one bad decision after another, and I don't understand where her head's at. I say this every episode. Yes, I know we don't victim blame, and she clearly was a victim in all this. And hearing the podcast, like, you understand what a con artist this guy was and how he tricked everybody. But I say all that to say, God, Deborah sucks so bad. I just want to shake her and then punch her in the face. I don't know what like, everybody was telling her, you are nuts. What are you doing? I just get really frustrated because say what you will about John, and there's tons of things to say. He's a terrible person. Deborah sure turned a blind eye to a lot of things. And the difference with Tanya, the ex, is as soon as she figured out that he was up to some stuff, she called the cops. And I love her for that. And she was trying to get away from him. And we'll get into it all. Okay, I have a whole new respect for Tanya. I really do. Okay, so meanwhile, Deborah goes in to meet an attorney, and it's kind of surprising because she doesn't seem to want to wake up out of this fog she's in. She's asking how to stop him, shows the paper trail to the attorney, and it's all about threats and intimidations. And again, this is where you want to smack Deborah because she keeps saying things like, well, maybe it's another guy named John Meehan. Oh, okay, dum-dum. She says, maybe it's not him. Maybe Tanya, his ex-wife, made up all this stuff about him. I mean, it's just like, really? Are you a teenager? Are you lovesick? Like, snap out of it. So then we go back to the past. Again, this episode, the timeline is everywhere. They don't really talk about this part in the podcast so much, or maybe I haven't gotten there yet. I've listened to this thing several times over the years, but just they're setting the stage to explain that he has a zero relationship with his parents. He keeps saying it. He's like, they won't be there at the wedding. I was raised by monsters. They dismiss it in the episode like they're monsters. You won't want to know what they did to me, implying some sort of abuse. In the real story, what he told her is that his mom is addicted to pills, and his dad was an alcoholic. What the real thing that happened, though, is they knew what a monster he was, and that his mom and sisters would speak up about what a monster he is, and he did not want Tanya to talk to them. Now, a very interesting part is we have the sisters on the podcast, and they are talking about what a monster he is. We get to find out a lot about his past. So I'm going to go into that real quick because what's going on this episode is cool, but I'd rather talk about what really happened. Okay, so in the podcast, we talked to two of his sisters. We talked to, his ex-wife Tanya. We talked to this detective. The ex-wife Tanya takes up most of the time in this episode, and it's so fascinating. I'll cut to the chase. We knew he was a monster, but she has recordings of him, and he is the most disgusting, scary-ass, terrible human being you've ever heard. He is straight up threatening her and laughing while he does it, talking about basically that he'll be far away when somebody picks her off. Now, this is the mother of his two children. At this point, his children are like, I think both 5 and under. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the most disgusting stuff you've ever heard. He's a terrible person. His sisters explain it, that his parents really screwed him up, that they say basically it is partially his fault, but it's also the fault of his parents because they raised the boys to be con artists. It's very strange. His dad ran a casino, and he was raised to be a con artist as well as his brothers. And we also find out in real life that one of his brothers, so of course we know John was addicted to drugs. One of his brothers died of an overdose, and they actually found a trail where he mailed him the drugs. But then they couldn't get him on that. I don't understand. None of it makes any sense, and it makes me mad. But yeah, he mailed him the drugs, and then from there, that was it for the brother. He died at like 46, I believe they said he was. The sister goes into how deeply the parents messed him up. They taught him how to like throw himself in front of cars and then hustle people out of money by saying, if you don't pay me something, we're going to call the insurance company. You're going to get in big trouble. Your insurance is going to go up. I mean, just crazy stuff. We find out that he did go to law school, but he didn't finish, and they allude to this in the show too. He didn't finish. He basically just dropped out or quit going or whatever. And this is about the time that he met Tanya. We also hear from this investigator. He's been in law enforcement / investigation. His name's Dennis. He's been there for like 40 years, and he said his 4-decade career in law enforcement, nothing compares to John Meehan. He said basically he's just stuck in his memory as one of the worst people he's ever dealt with. He has a void for a soul. He was so heavily addicted to drugs. And they talk about things that he would do. And this guy helped get the charge of theft of surgical drugs to stick. So at least he got him in jail for like 17 months or something. To me, one of the most, besides the actual recordings of Dirty John threatening Tanya, that is like spine shiver level of, it just grossed me out so bad. The detective tells a story of how, and they talk about it in this episode a little bit, how he would, like, they used Demerol, I believe they said it was. This patient needed it before or after surgery or during surgery, whatever it was. Well, instead of giving it to them, he leaned over and stuck it in himself instead and came back up and pretended like he'd given it to the patient. Just horrible, terrible things. Oh, he's the worst. He's the worst. So at this point, Jacqueline walks in. I'm calling her Jacqueline. They call her Ronnie on the show, but her real name's Jacqueline. She walks in and confronts her mom saying, "You married him." And she says, the way I found out is because Toby told me, because John told him. Now, this is a big deal because Toby is her nephew. Deborah had taken him on because, unfortunately, Toby's dad took out his mom. And so Deborah was always very close to Toby. Well, Toby went over to the house to have a conversation with her, and John said he was trespassing. He no longer had an aunt, and a good thing that his mom had passed because then she couldn't see what a loser he was. This all really happened. That's exactly what he supposedly said, and oh my God, just hearing it back breaks my heart. So while I think Jacqueline is a lot, I loved her in the scene. I did. She's telling her mom, like, what the hell are you doing? You know he's after your money, right? And he's threatening our family. And how do you not see this? And again, the mom, Deborah, is just so la-da-da, clueless. There's got to be a new word for clueless, how clueless she is. It's just head up her ass like I've never seen. She could give Michael Patrick King a run for his money. No, but seriously, it's awful. She just won't hear any of this. She just didn't want to hear it. So the daughter finally says, like, well, I hope you got a prenup. Again, no answer. She just says she's dealing with it. Whatever that means. Just okay, great. So daughter leaves, and we go back to John and his ex-wife Tanya, who is vouching for John. This is when this is how we find out he got into nurse. You know what I'm saying? I can't say that. We're at anesthetist school. Basically, his wife vouched for him. She helped him get in the program. He lied and said he was still in law school. He was not. And the person interviewing him for the school said that, well, that's a good start, and older students have a high rate of success, and it'll be a lot of work, but if you're willing to do it, we can make this work. Well, and again, in the real life story, that's one of the things that Tanya says she feels most guilty about, is she thought she was doing the right thing for her family and helping her husband out, get into this really good program and get him into this great job. And of course, we find out all he wanted to do was steal the drugs and hurt people. And so she said she carries around a tremendous amount of guilt about that. And I say, again, I'm not trying to be hateful, but at least Tanya was on the ball and realizing, shit, something is really wrong, down the line. Whereas Deborah is just like, nah, it's probably all right. What? He's threatening to kill my daughter, my nephew? Oh, that's probably okay. He's just kidding. So then we get an interesting scene where Deborah goes to the safety deposit box. Again, it's been years since I've listened to this podcast. I know that it comes up. It's not in this episode yet. So the timeline here might be a little bit off. But basically what happens is she goes to the safety deposit box. She opens it up. And there's a flashback to where she was telling him, hey, I have like $80,000 or $90,000 in cash around the house. Good God. And John's like, well, let's put it in a safe deposit. Let's put it in a safety deposit box. She's just like, okay. And let's put our passports, our rings, all that stuff in there. Okay. So when she opens the safety deposit box, of course the cash isn't there. She comes home. He's being weird. He says he's got an upset stomach. So again, this might be fabricated for the show because they didn't really talk about this yet in the podcast, but head of brass Deborah at least had the forethought to do this. He says, I got a text today. Why didn't you tell me you were at the safety deposit box? She was able to lie quick on her feet and say that her daughter, Veronica, had realized that they were married, so she got their rings out of safety deposit. We don't have to hide it anymore. This answer seems to appease him. He also fed her a bunch of bullshit about, oh, if you didn't see the cash, it's because I invested it through a friend. And she's just like, okay. But again, the fact that she could just say, okay, and not question it. And then even if she's pretending for him to be normal, the fact that he wouldn't be like, oh, that's weird that she's not questioning me, says a lot about her. So they play happy, nice. I don't know what she's doing. I would like to say that she's being smart and pretending like everything's fine for his benefit. I don't even know if it's that. I think she truly just can't remember what the hell's going on or how she's supposed to act. I don't even know. But he hugs her and says, we're married now, yay. And she's like, yay. Okay. So then we go back to the old wedding. Again, it's Tanya. And he's wedding. We're kind of flashing around. And then again, things get interesting. Okay. So Tanya goes to this conference where she meets this very nice lady, Maggie. And she gets to talking to her. Again, Tanya's there as, to learn more about the nursing stuff. She's clearly, you can see here, she got her name tag on. After the conference, she goes up, strikes up a conversation. They're comparing notes. It like all clicks. Maggie realizes, oh my God, my boyfriend's name is John Meehan. And they figure out, holy shit, it's the same guy. And Maggie freaks out. And okay, let me tell you what really happened. So they address this in the podcast, but just kind of, again, they didn't really get into it unless it comes later. I can't remember. So he actually in real life told his ex-wife Tanya, it was about 10 years in, that it was over, he was leaving her, filing for a divorce, and then he met this doctor. And the doctor actually lived in Michigan, and he had to travel around doing his nursing work, and he had met her. Now, on the show, it's like they ran into each other, but in real life, it sounds like he actually spilled the beans. The thing about him that they allude to here, and they show it in a minute with him, and they talk about it in the podcast, even his sisters talk about it, is he always felt like he needed to use women to get ahead. That was his thing. He would target women, tell them whatever they needed to hear, and try to always land the bigger, better thing. Now, again, the sisters kind of address this too and say he had an obsession with James Bond. He was convinced he was suave and charming enough to live that lifestyle, and that he could target these women. And I mean, he scammed everybody, but he would target these women and was always on to the bigger, better. So we see it here. He's telling her, like, she confronts him about Maggie. He's trying to lie about it first, and he's just like, screw it, starts laughing, and is like, yeah, she makes, whatever, almost $500,000 a year, so I think I'm going to be with her now. It's just disgusting. He's awful. I'm thinking that's the best possible scenario, right? If he just left, but that's not exactly what happens, unfortunately. Okay, so Veronica is at the investigator's office. Now, remember, this is Judy Reyes from Scrubs, and they're looking over John's felonies, and it just seems to be a list of things, mostly threats, restraining order type situations, lots of felonies, he used a list of social security numbers. They talked about that on the podcast, that he was always getting different credit cards and different people's names. It's just just all the awful things you would think. Veronica brings up that she felt like he might have been homeless when he met her mom, and sure enough, he had just gotten out of jail. And that's true. He had just gotten out of jail within days of meeting Deborah. So that's probably why he looked like that and acted like that. Okay, so now this is where the show differs a little bit from real life. They make it seem like this nurse saw John do this, where he pretended to administer drugs to this patient who desperately needed them, but instead he dropped them in his back pocket and took them home. Well, what really happened is Tanya figured it out. She found the drug stuff around the house. After finding about the girlfriend, she was so mad. She was searching through the house to see what other things he lied about. She found it. She ended up calling the cops directly right then because she said she had a duty to protect his patients. I'm telling you, Tanya's a badass. And protect her kids. So that's what she did. Here, they're making it seem like this friend did. Now, friends weren't involved. We find out in real life he ended up going to work. He was somewhere else, like Indiana or something, and her friends ended up reporting him to that board too, and he immediately lost his job, lost his license, all that stuff. So, yeah, very similar. I'm sure it's just for storytelling purposes. They had to show it like this so we could see what the hell he was up to, and we had to see somebody do it. Tanya gave the reason that she decided to search everything is because she could technically, like, it could affect her job as well because she's licensed and she's around stolen drugs, and it could affect, they could take her kids. So again, she's a badass. I love Tanya. She's fantastic. Very interested in her podcast. Okay, so then again, we're kind of going around in time frame. We go to Deborah. Her attorney calls her, that lady she met with, and says, basically, I cannot take this case. John has sued every single lawyer that's been on his side or against him and filed complaints and never paid anybody, and he's a nightmare. And that's actually true. That's something that came up. The sisters were talking about that. They know how to work the system, so they would just tie everybody up in this legal bullshit. Well, Deborah ends up having, because of this, she's just so anxious. They show her at the hospital. She's getting anti-anxiety meds prescribed and stuff. Sounds like she's having a panic attack. So again, we flash back to the wedding, and we go between John and Tanya's wedding, and then we see the similarities with John and Deborah's wedding, where basically he's just lying through the whole thing. He's putting on this charm and completely being the psychopath that he is. So after all this goes down with Tanya, she ends up meeting back up with the best man guy and kind of asking more questions like, how well did you know John? And again, he only knew him for a couple years beforehand. They went to law school together, but John's quit showing up, and he basically says, I was actually surprised you guys got together. And she said, why? And he said, because he's always been a dog with women. He was filthy. That's, again, they talk about that nickname and why he got that. She is just shocked to learn all this. She had no idea that he was so gross and so deceitful. So then Deborah comes out of the hospital, and she's greeted by her daughter, who helps her. We just see a quick shot of them giving hugs and basically implying, I'm here for your mom, even though you're being a dumb. Again, this didn't quite happen in this order, but close enough. Okay, Tanya, oh my God. So we see him, they wanted to make it more menacing, I'm sure. So we see him threatening her in person. What happened is she was recording this. I don't know. It sounded like they were on a phone. Maybe they were in person. Who knows? But the real John actually said these things to her while laughing about, just see what happens. Stuff's going to happen to you, that kind of stuff. And you better answer me honestly. Who called the nursing board? That's something he was really questioning her on. And it wasn't her, but he sure thought it was. So he came after her hard. Meanwhile, Deborah is over at the private investigator's office. Just when you think she's going to see the light, nope, she's not. They're talking about the restraining orders that were taken out on him. Turns out they were from some cops who took out restraining orders. Active duty police women who he went after and harassed so much they had to take out restraining orders. The PI is telling her you need to get away, you need to stay in hotels, you need to switch your car, your clothes, you need to make yourself a difficult target and always be thinking of your surroundings. again, I have to give this actress, Connie Britton, all the credit in the world. She plays this part perfectly because I'm not trying to be too hard. Well, I am kind of hard on Deborah, but in the podcast, you can hear her. She thinks like this. She's like, I don't know what to do. What should I do? Should I get away from him? What do I do? That's exactly how Connie Britton is playing this part to a T. She's fabulous. Okay. So she's asking this PI, what should I do? And the PI is like, well, I can't tell you what to do. You need to get yourself out of there and figure it out. So then Deborah's like, okay, I got to go meet John. Bye. So she goes back to work. She climbs in the car with John, who's clearly pissed and driving really fast. It's very weird. We go back to Tanya, who is terrified because John is trying to break into her house. I don't know why she didn't call the police right then. She grabs a knife. She's trying to stop him. But this prompts her to make the call she's never made. And again, this is something she talks about in the podcast that really happened. She ends up calling John's mom. And John's mom answers. And again, they've been together 10 years and not spoken. And the mom says, I was waiting for this call. I figured you would call. This whole time, Tanya's been told how awful the mother is. And that's not the case at all. It's Dolores Meehan. She was totally willing to talk to her and to figure out what the hell is going on. And it just, what a shock to find out your mother-in-law, who you thought was this terrible person, is actually the nice one, and your husband's a terrible person. Okay, so Deborah and John, he falls to the ground. He throws up. He's clearly sick. Something is going on. So what really happened is he had a back surgery, I believe it was, and it ended up he had a bowel obstruction after surgery, and so he had to go back in. And that's the time she used to collect her things. What happens here is he just collapses. They do discuss bowel obstruction, but the nurse is asking her all about the opioid usage. And Deborah is just completely clueless. She has no idea. And she ends up saying something like, I don't know. I just need to go. I can't handle this medical stuff. I just need to walk out while you guys have a consult. I'm going to go pray in the chapel. I mean, I'm talking like that because that's how she talks. Just so, grow a pair. Okay. So she gives him a smooch and says, I love you. You'll be fine. She walks out, and that's the last we see of her there. We go back to the wedding of John and Tanya, again juxtaposed to Deborah and John's wedding, just showing his pattern for just straight up lying to people. The episode ends with Deb packing up her things and moving out. Ronnie is there helping her. They're using the vans, of course, from her interior design business. That's how it ends. Dying to see what happens next. Such a good episode. Again, I'm really impressed with how true to life they've kept this. They've done a great job. You know, it's hard when you do shows and stuff. Of course, things are going to change, so it makes it easier to explain certain things, but they've kept it pretty close because I'm obsessed with spotting the differences. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. A huge thank you to Amanda. Thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for picking this show. I'm having so much fun recapping it. The response has been incredible. I'm so glad so many of you are enjoying this. I really am excited to keep going with it. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your comments. Again, I'm interested in the ex-wife's podcast. I might go into that if that's something you guys want to talk about. Maybe after I finish up Dirty John, we can look into that. And thank you guys for everything. If you're interested in Patreon, please check it out. I'm putting the link on the screen right now. Check it out and come support us over there and have fun and watch the original Sex and the City shows as well. Thank you guys for everything. Have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.